I'm Dr. Mark Sue, and welcome to the Functional Medicine Reality Podcast. Join me and our community weekly as we bring you unfiltered health from inflammation to longevity. Real stories, real people, real solutions. Experience real-life health changes from both patients and practitioners, and learn how to turn cutting-edge information into real results in your own life so you can feel better, live longer, live healthier, and be confident and clear in your healthcare choices. Let's get real and get results. Hey folks, this is Dr. Mark Sue, your host. This is the Functional Medicine Reality Podcast. Welcome to another episode. Usually I am your co-host, but in this session, this is a solo shot. And today we are going to do a brief update and overview on the latest and greatest perspective on the topic of Lyme disease. This topic is rather near and dear to my heart because it is the singular topic that opened the doorway for me into the world of functional medicine. And while that's not always one and the same, there's a great overlap. I said to my good friend, Dr. George Papanicolaou, and he reminds me from time to time, you said years ago, Mark, you can't do Lyme disease without practicing functional medicine. And I still hold true to that statement today. But today we're just going to talk through some overview principles, reflections on the topic of Lyme disease. Because look, it is hot. It is in the news a lot of late, right? And some of that is because of the interest in the current administration's topics of interest in the public health care arena, right? I do a quick Google search here, and right off the top of the bat here on the page, the CDC predicts a record-breaking year with over 500,000 Americans expected to contract Lyme disease, straight from the HHS government website. Record case numbers. It's not just speculations, okay? Even if somebody wants to be a skeptic and says, hey, yeah, that's the whole political RFK thing going on. Hey, here's some hard case data straight from the CDC's website as well. Record case numbers. Emergency room visits for tick bites have seen dramatic multi-year highs. Regions like the Northeast and Midwest continue to be hotspots, while localized clusters, such as in this particular county in Ohio, have reported elevated case counts for 4 consecutive years. All right, so this isn't, when we talk about 4 consecutive years, we're not talking about just a recent political movement, okay, or recent political interest. Moving on into other piece of news here. New York Times from July of 2026. Opinion piece, sounding the alarm on the shifting tick ecology, how ticks are spreading into new regions, thriving in new conditions. And the article titled, We're Living in a Tick Nightmare. It's time to go to war. All right, that's a little strong, but look, this is the New York Times, all right? If we want to be a skeptic and talk about the politics, because there are politics involved with Lyme disease. I hate to say it. I personally don't like politics. I've always kind of hated it quite frankly, but there's reality to it, all right? And so there is politics around Lyme disease. We'll talk about it briefly, we'll touch on it, but the New York Times, we're going back and forth on the different sides of the sort of spectrum, if you will, from these different resources, okay? Here, you want to talk about some hardcore, more academic resources, a 60 Minutes episode. An MIT professor is quoted, the natural disaster in our area is not hurricanes or tornadoes or earthquakes, it is Lyme disease. And lastly, a dig into further back into November of 2025. All right, another 60 Minutes piece talking about Lyme disease often goes undetected when it's most treatable. And it's an article about some teens who are ambitiously trying to do something to affect that. And again, to the skeptic out there about Lyme disease from a political spectrum, November 2025, we're still pretty new in the political landscape there, all right? We didn't hit a lot of this more recent Lyme disease focus until sometime after November of 2025 into early 2026. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with all that political attention, you can disregard that, all right? I don't want to make this a political discussion because it's really not about that. I'm just, I think a lot of people know I'm a bit of a skeptic at heart. All right. For those of you who feel a little cringy or abrasive with all the sort of sales pitches all over social media, podcasts, the talking heads and news left and right and where the sources are coming from, you can feel good that I'm a skeptic. I wouldn't say I'm a cynic, but I'm a skeptic. I'm constantly questioning biases and where sources are coming from. All right. So I'm trying to give just an even spread on where the tension is coming from. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, this has been a long-standing topic in the non-conventional, I'll just from now on say functional medicine world for many, many, many years. I am forever indebted to Michelle, one of the nurse practitioners in our primary care office, who introduced me to the topic of chronic Lyme disease. And this was before, or right around 2006 to 2008 in my second employed job. And she introduced me to that topic because it was something that was a personal family battle for her. And it highlighted the observations I had made for 3 years in my first job, where I didn't understand why fibromyalgia patients were recurrently telling me that they would feel better with their aches and pains when they were on antibiotics for something like strep throat or an ear infection. It just didn't add up to me. But what, is someone trying to scam me of antibiotics? I think not, right? So I'm asking myself, what's the common denominator here? Why? Why? What is going on behind the scenes here? All right. And so let's just jump into Lyme disease here. That's enough on just somewhat current events, recent events, and the news. I'm going to go through just 4 or 5 reflection topics on the matter of subtopics on the matter of Lyme disease. Number 1, historically, I don't hear this talked about anymore, but historically, Lyme disease is discussed as and referred to as the great masquerader. It can present, and this is just conventional teaching that I received even when I was in medical school. It can present in so many different ways, right? In symptomatology, in severity. There are patients who can be hospitalized off the bat, on initial infection. Here's my take home. As such, as a great masquerader, if you are a patient who is more familiar with the conventional medicine arena, you don't have a lot of familiarity with functional medicine or non-conventional healthcare. Maybe you're a skeptic about the functional medicine world. That's okay. You be you, right? Everyone's got their own timing and journey. But I would submit to you as a conventional medicine arena familiar individual, as a patient or practitioner, 150%, the topic of Lyme disease is underdiagnosed. And we won't go into details about why right now. If you are functional medicine literate, either as a patient or a practitioner, all right, I would question how many patients might be overdiagnosed. And that might be a little blasphemy to a lot of my colleagues, all right? And I'm okay with taking that heat, because if I specify here, I don't necessarily even mean overdiagnosed on paper. I just mean, what I really mean to say is overfocused, okay? And really, one of the principles here is that patients with chronic Lyme disease, historically anyway, are treated with just Lyme disease as the focus. It's antibiotics. And easily, I have a lot of functional medicine colleagues, very esteemed, astute, and mentor and key opinion leader, thought leader type practitioners who are discouraged with the patients they take on who have been treated with all these antibiotics for Lyme disease recurrently. And they're saying, and I can remember with great vivid recall some of those conferences where they're outright saying, I'm left dealing with the collateral damage. And yet they're better, but not, they've got a long way to go, oftentimes. All right. The antibiotics are not a trivial decision. And when it's long-term, there are consequences to be had. Furthermore, I think it is much more accepted now among the practitioner community that a meaningful percentage of people who have chronic Lyme disease have other conditions in tow. Okay. It's not just Lyme disease. It's often other conditions. And as we've highlighted on other podcast sessions, especially, I believe, in particular with Mike Schranz, the IEP professional expert, doctor of homes. I'm the doctor of people. He's a doctor of homes. We've talked about Lyme and mold. You see that all over the place. Lyme and mold and Lyme. These are 2 of the sort of big dog players in individuals who have medical mysteries, who have medical conditions that just don't really have a diagnosis in the conventional world, and they're struggling with all kinds of symptoms. All right. So the great masquerader, conventionally, it's underdiagnosed. In the functional medicine world, historically more than now, but perhaps there's been some horse blinders on, and it's time to look more broadly and not to ignore Lyme disease, not to say it's not there, not to say that it's an accurate diagnosis, but that it's not the only player in town. There is, as we call, a terrain theory here. There's a lot more going on in the terrain, in the bucket of inflammation than just Lyme disease. All right. Reflection number 2. We're going to talk about testing here for just a second. I'm not going to get into really nitty-gritty details here and technicalities, but in the conventional medicine world, absolutely underdiagnosed. The testing is undersensitive. I might even dare say insensitive, if I'm being more honest. In the functional medicine world, again, this is possibly it's certainly a key contributor as to the reason why Lyme disease is often, quote unquote, overdiagnosed. All right, because here's the deal. Again, I'm not going to spend the time here talking about the conventional labs and why they're less sensitive. There's so many details that are just eye-opening. All right, they're eye-opening. The number of markers, the type of markers being used. There's understandable reason why some of those markers are not included in the conventional medicine labs, and that's even if you get past first base. All right, the first base screening labs are pretty inaccurate, and that is based on data that we can point out in the medical literature. We can find them online. It's public information. This isn't like unpublished info and hearsay. Okay. This is published information, and even some of that information as we teach in our virtual practice at RootSeek to our patients who are very commonly diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease. We have whole videos around this. There is some of that data, published data, it was put forth by conventional researchers, all right? And some of them even by federal government authorities, okay, from individuals who were involved with what's called CAP, this entity that regulates standards of practice for lab testing, right? These are pathologists, like conventionally trained and conventionally practicing pathologists. It's eye-opening, all right, to say the least. So there's a lot of people. I think that 60-minute CBS News article about Lyme disease often goes undetected when it's most treatable, hands down, all right? That is, it's my conviction, 150%. That one of the primary reasons we have so much of what's called chronic Lyme disease is because there are so many people who are undiagnosed early on, and yes, it can also be subtle as well. But the lack of and insufficiency of diagnosis is a major reason for chronic Lyme. On the other hand, when it comes to the functional medicine arena, right, a lot of the testing we use are antibody based, and antibodies don't always tell us if the problem is still there. It's your immune system saying, I've seen this, I have a memory of it, but is it really still there, or are we just still treating it? And there's, again, without getting technical into details right now, the antibody tests are not always, they don't always tell the full story. And oftentimes they do, but not always. All right. And so we also have some other types of testing that we use in the functional medicine world. Hey, they're available to anybody, but it's just they're not typically used in the conventional world. They're called T-cell testing. All right. Often termed ELISpot tests for those who are familiar with the Lyme disease world a bit. And then we also have some PCR-based tests. Many of us, hopefully most of us, or maybe not all of us, will remember PCR tests from COVID, with the nose swabs. Is it an antibody blood test, or is it a PCR test in the nose? All right, these swabs. And so the problem with the PCR test and the T-cells testing, the labs I'm familiar with, they only have a limited number of strains that we can test for. And then when it comes to PCR testing, you got to be able to see it in that aliquot, that tube of blood. All right, if you draw that blood, someone could have Lyme disease in their body, but when you draw that tube of blood, you only get that small amount of blood. And if there isn't Lyme disease in that tube, then it's going to be a negative test. All right, it's not widespread. The Lyme disease is not in every square centimeter of your blood. And so what's the chance that you're going to pick it up on that particular draw in that one tube? All right. So there are imperfections in the methodologies across the board. It's a tricky topic, no doubt. There are many tricky topics in conventional medicine. They just don't get a lot of flack, whereas Lyme disease has, and that's part of the political flavor of this whole matter. So testing, again, wrap up. Conventional testing and conventional medicine arena, severely underdiagnosed. Functional medicine, it's kind of like same as the reflection on the great masquerader topic, where it could be Lyme disease, but it might not be at least all Lyme disease. All right, it's time to look at the terrain, look broader. Third reflection, prescriptions. I should say treatment, not prescriptions, treatment. Antibiotics are a mainstay, all right? Pharmaceutical antibiotics, they can help. I use them regularly with Lyme patients, acute and chronic Lyme patients. There are also herbal antimicrobials, herbal antibiotics, if you will. All right. Obviously, the data is not as strong. There isn't as much data. A lot of the supplement companies, as has been discussed in previous podcasts, they don't have the money. A lot of times, the incentive. I would like to believe money first. They don't have the money to put forward all this testing. Okay, it's a great expense, but there are options both with prescriptions and non-prescriptions. I use the non-prescriptions all the time. I get asked the question regularly, well, which one would you choose? All right. And to date, if you made me select a decision, then when someone's dealing with acute Lyme disease, I'm usually going with the pharmaceuticals. And if we're dealing with chronic Lyme disease, I'm more often dealing with herbals. It's a matter of how long I'm anticipating the person's going to need to be on antibiotics for. All right. I often chuckle to myself about, in the conventional world, just speaking to this, how long the antibiotics might go for, and it's not okay to be on antibiotics for a significant amount of time. Look, I'm not just saying it's willy-nilly and neglect the mindfulness of antibiotic stewardship at all. But hey, we gave antibiotics for months and months and months for acne. That is not an unusual thing. And hey, yeah, we do it for geriatric population, senior citizens who deal with UTIs recurrently as well. Okay. Again, not saying it's okay or it's good, but hey, we want to be mindful about our internal conflicts and kind of speaking out of both sides of our mouth. Okay. If we're going to over politicize one thing, we got to at least acknowledge that, hey, this isn't like a universal application. We use antibiotics long-term for things like acne, UTIs, or et cetera, et cetera. So let's at least give some credibility to the consideration for the individual patient about use of antibiotics for more than like 2 weeks for Lyme disease, okay? More than 10 days. If someone's on antibiotics for 2 months, I beg to differ that we need to get on our high horse about someone having been on antibiotics for more than 2 weeks. The big reflection point for me here with the therapeutics is the matter of, can we treat Lyme disease without antimicrobials at all, without antibiotics of pharma or herbal forms? I just don't know the answer to that right now. All right. I'm not an early adopter. I need to see some evidence as much as I can, at least some data, some rationale and principle. And if we don't have that, then the test of time is my biggest test, right? Therapies that work for patients over enough patients across the board over time, they're going to stick around. So peptides are obviously a big topic these days. And I know some colleagues who are lauding treating Lyme disease with peptides. All right, among other things. Am I a fan of peptides? Absolutely. Am I a fan of IV ozone? Absolutely. Would I use those in solo without other antimicrobials, like as a solo treatment or as the mainstay and dominant intervention I'm relying upon? I feel like I'm skating on thin ice. I don't know that I'm doing the patient the best service. All right. No judgment to colleagues who are doing that, because maybe they know something that I don't. I'm very open-minded to that. But right now, I'm not feeling comfortable with that. In conjunction, yes. Alone, not so much. All right. Reflection point number 4. This is more of a for those who are just interested in context, right? It's more thinking about the landscape and the history of chronic Lyme in the world of functional medicine and chronic inflammation. So I've already described my personal story with the importance of Lyme disease in ushering me into the functional medicine world. But on the completely flip side of the story, in more recent handful of years or so since the pandemic, is this is like old hat. All right. I'm looking at a publication in front of me right now. It's called MIT News of the MIT community. This is a publication, a reprint from March and April of 2024. And the title with the front page photo and the highlight article within it says this: long haul COVID and chronic Lyme disease are surprisingly similar. MIT immunoengineer Mickey Tal is on the case. And I'm going to fast forward. If you go into the reprint here inside on page 23, there's a huge quote. It takes up over a quarter of the page, and it doesn't give the details here, but Dr. Tal is quoted saying, long COVID looks exactly, and I mean exactly, like chronic Lyme. End quote. Again, we'd have to read the article to get into details about what kind of metrics of measurement she's talking about, the symptomatology and things of that nature. But this is just a reflection, a highlight on that. Our view on what many people might call, as is in this article inside is actually called Tackling Long Haul Diseases. And unless it's changed in the last year, if you look at the CDC website about various bugs, bacteria, whatever that can cause these sort of chronic conditions, they now list Borrelia, Lyme disease on there, similar to SARS-CoV-2 from COVID. All right. I would dare say there's been a shift. I don't want to say an awakening. I don't want to say a full pivot, but there's definitely been a shift in the medical community as a whole, and certainly in the public since the pandemic. The screen has been shattered. People have seen behind the curtain. We've seen the Oz. There's a lot more than meets the eye than what we have in conventional medicine. And that is not a shade. That is not an accusation. It's not an emotional poke and prod. There's nothing new here. It's just that more the public now recognizes that there's more open-mindedness as a whole. And these long-haul diseases, it's really referring largely to conditions whereby these bugs or toxins, bacteria, viruses, fungus, they often don't leave our bodies. And that's not a death sentence. That is not a Debbie Downer, and we don't need to just be destined to suffering. But now we have to talk about, again, the terrain. How many different bugs and toxins are constantly there and persistently there now are we not able to get rid of? And how strong is our immune system in confronting and regulating and getting rid of as much as we can? All right, because we don't live in a bubble, and the longer we live, the more these environmental, what we call exposomes, these environmental exposures that we are faced with undeniably and unavoidably. How many of these do we accumulate over time, and what kinds are they, and how does our body, our immune system especially, deal with them? All right, so these long haul diseases, if we now go looking back, kind of going backwards from the pandemic. In my book, Lyme disease is kind of like the flag bearer. It's the topic that has sort of set the precedence. And for those of you who don't know, historically, even now still, there are certain states where doctors will not talk about the fact, they will not make it known that they treat chronic Lyme disease because they are at great jeopardy of being audited and or having their license at risk of being stripped. I don't know if it's still the case right now for fact, but I know at a conference, I'm going to guess, it's just before the pandemic, let's call it 8 years ago, there were doctors I met from certain states, I won't say, where they said if that if they were to put on a website that they treated chronic Lyme, that they would very plausibly, very likely have their license taken away. That the state boards are very aggressive about denying and defying this topic of chronic Lyme disease and then coming after these doctors. And sometimes it's other doctor colleagues who are reporting these doctors. All right. Imagine that, right? Hey, is that deja vu? Is that really like history repeating itself when we saw some of this happening in the pandemic as well, right? So again, this is where some of that political stuff kind of gets mixed in, and it gets harder and harder to tell, with better clarity, truth from myth or truth from hype versus hope. All right. So again, the big picture here is, not only personally was Lyme disease such it was a can event for me in my professional journey. And I dare say I'm appreciative to the practitioners and the advocates in the Lyme disease community, the ILADS organization, the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society, ilads.org, for standing in the face of all that criticism and facing the brunt, taking all that heat for so many years. And only since then has there been an evolution, the way I see it, in the history of these long haul diseases, these chronic inflammatory mystery conditions, whereby after Lyme disease, after so many years and so many doctors being at risk and taking heat and scrutiny and not only badmouth, sometimes just paraded with all kinds of accusations and slander against them, then comes the whole mold illness topic for many, many years, right? And again, I will reference previous podcasts with Mike Schranz and I, Richie Shoemaker, and the surviving mold community, and the evolution into ICI, the organization ISEAI that I have the privilege to be on the board for, with the mold illness topic. And then subsequent to that, in my book anyway, the topic of the worm parasites. And then more recently, we were talking about SARS-CoV-2. And all along the way, there's all kinds of other conditions. We can talk about chronic mono and et cetera, et cetera. But you get the picture. Lyme disease in my book we were talking going back into maybe late 90s, and it really was instrumental in the shifts in our landscape when it comes to the topics of chronic inflammation and chronic illness. Last subtopic within this fourth reflection on the landscape and history of chronic inflammation and where Lyme disease fits in that. I find it fascinating still now. I don't know what to make of this, but I have so many practitioner colleagues who tell me that they don't want to touch Lyme disease. And these aren't the sort of older generation MDs and DOs who have practiced in the conventional world and are still a little bit traumatized and fearful of being out in public saying they treat Lyme disease. A lot of times these are even my chiropractor colleagues and et cetera, and other naturopaths even. There's health coaches included. Folks seem to be a little more nervous about Lyme disease, and I think what I infer is that they're concerned about a lot of the reactivity and these Herx reactions. Again, I'm not going to get into details if you don't know what that is. I'll reference other podcasts, and there's all kinds of information on the internet, et cetera, on AI and et cetera. But yeah, I personally actually think of mold illness as more complicated than Lyme disease in both arenas and many others. You can't just focus on the one topic. It's a whole broad scope of care for the patient from a very more holistic and comprehensive and functional medicine framework and paradigm. You can't just treat mold illness or treat Lyme disease only. And mold is, to me, is like twofold more complicated because you got to treat the person and their environment, right? Lyme disease, yeah, there's various kinds of Lyme disease. Again, won't get into that detail here, but I find the mold illness to be more complicated than Lyme disease. A lot of people seem like they're less comfortable and would rather not and refer their patients or clients out for Lyme disease. So just an interesting phenomenon. If you're a practitioner and you that speaks to you or you have insight on that, I'd love to hear from you and educate me, give me some insight. Last reflection here, and it's a brief one, is the topic of fear. All right. Mike Schranz and I have talked about this in another podcast as well, the limbic system, right? Fight or flight. It is totally understandable and justifiable that people are afraid of ticks after having battled Lyme disease, having gone through their journeys of Lyme disease. And some people, they're really sick. Let's not kid ourselves. Let's not undervalue how sick some patients are with even Lyme disease alone. Even in isolation, apart from other conditions, some people are really sick, okay? Putting aside everything I just said, that it's commonly a multifactorial topic, many other sources of information, other players in the bucket of information for the patient, but Lyme disease itself deserves and warrants merit for how significant of an impact it can have on individuals. And for anybody who's gone through meaningful illness with Lyme disease, it is so understood, it's justified that they are afraid of ticks. They can be triggered by seeing a tick, all right? I understand that. And so I'm not minimizing that, yet having said that, similar to what Mike and I talked about with the limbic system with mold illness, this is a topic that ideally needs to be addressed with any given patient and even with the practitioners, okay? There are practitioners who maybe they've dealt with Lyme disease themselves, maybe they haven't. But if we're so blinders minded, tunnel visioned toward tick equals Lyme disease equals trigger, oh, we went from 0 to 60 in a heartbeat and you got to do this, blah, 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 blah. Otherwise you're going to die. Like, we're doing our patients a disservice. All right. We've got to regulate as practitioners our own biases and fight or flight responses, because that's going to come across to a patient even if we don't verbally say it. All right. We need to show up for our patients and better to be able to help them regulate by not being dysregulated ourselves first and foremost. Even if we know that this needs to be taken seriously, even if we know that the patient may not be taking it more seriously than they should, there are ways to do this and communicate this in a meaningful and effective way without triggering people and gaslighting them. Okay? The same topic that Mike and I talked about with mold illness absolutely applies to Lyme disease. And I will even speak to it just in this regard, just to commiserate, okay? And that I'm not being just talking from an ivory tower. Or this last weekend, our family, my wife and I, we have 4 kids. 2 of the kids and my wife and I went on a walk at a local reservation for all intents and purposes. It's a wooded area, okay? It's not just a park, it's a wooded area. It's beautiful. It's peaceful. But man, we know, I just read off all these news articles about everyone's talking about how many ticks are out now. And this was even predicted over a year ago, 2 years ago with the climate change and whatnot, with the vector-borne illnesses, these vectors, these bugs. There's more and more that's going on, right? Even stuff that we didn't see for many, many years is starting to show up again. It's not just Lyme disease, but with all this news going on, I'll be the first to admit, as we're getting ready to go on the walk, I'm thinking to myself, I hate bug repellent. Right? And it's not even just the synthetic chemicals that it is. It's the smell. When I get home, I know I'm going to have to rinse off and shower just because of that alone, which is just annoying to me. Okay. It's a peeve of mine of some sort. I'm just annoyed by it. So I'm sitting there like, okay, am I going to put on repellent? Am I going to put on long sleeve shirt and pants and roll my socks over my pants to keep ticks from getting under my pant legs? These are all thoughts I'm going through because I know the measures we can take to prevent attached ticks and tick bites. And then it goes next, I won't say spiraling, but it went to the next sequence. I'm thinking like, okay, so then I'm going to have to do, hair check and body checks, tick check, through myself. And then on my wife, the 2 kids, we're going to have to do all this. And, I land in the place of like, man, is it even worth going out? And man, are we putting ourselves at some risk? Because, quite frankly, I just don't go on that walk in that woodsy area that often at all. More for it's just not my routine. I have other interests and hobbies beyond that. So aside from that, but nonetheless, we did go on the walk. Okay. But I went through that. I went through that whole thought process and it's flashing through my head in just seconds. And we did the tick checks and we threw the clothes in the laundry and all that. But, I sat there and related with other patients. Man, if I was a patient who's gone through significant Lyme disease and not even gone through it myself, maybe my family member or a real close friend went through hell and back with Lyme disease, I get it how much I might be like, I think I might pass on that walk. Or, man, I'm going to go, but I'm kind of like walking with looking around all over and checking my arms and checking my hair every 3 seconds. I I can get where people are coming from. All right. I can sympathize and envision that. And that's just a tough place to be. But at the same time, I acknowledge it. At the same time, I advocate that by having that awareness and acknowledging it, we really should make efforts to do something about that, because that is not serving us any good, whether for ourselves as a patient or as practitioners towards our patients. All right. And it doesn't have to be a whole work and burden to address that. It's just daily fight or flight reduction. And again, I won't go into details on the many various modalities of that, right? Breath work, deep breathing, meditation, vagus nerve stimulation, all kinds of possibilities. So I wind down here and come to a close. Lyme disease, really meaningful in the spectrum of functional medicine, in the arena of long haul diseases and chronic inflammatory conditions, medical mysteries, you name it. Lyme disease is a front and center topic in my book, and it is making the news, understandably, of late. It is a great masquerader. It can show with so many different kinds of symptoms. It is fraught with challenges in the arena of testing. It is underdiagnosed, both because of that symptom diversity and the insensitive tests in the conventional arena. It understandably has received a lot of attention and focus in the functional medicine community, and I dare argue in some patient cases, we've got to take the horse blinders off and look more broadly and not just keep digging deeper and deeper into the topic of Lyme disease with those patients to help them get better for the sake of the patient. Okay. And then thirdly, when it comes to therapies, antimicrobials are still meaningfully at play. I'm definitely a big fan of the herbal forms of antibiotics, if you will, for longer sustained treatment. And it's to be determined in my book how much we can count on and lean on the peptide and other therapies for Lyme disease, okay? At least as a solo or dominant therapy direction. And ultimately, I am speaking to acknowledging the political landscape around Lyme disease, but its integration in all kinds of conversations and discussions when it comes to long haul diseases, and the fact that it still has a place of respect among the practitioners where many don't want to tackle that topic. Okay, because of its complexity. And finally, whether practitioner or patient, fear and the limbic system fight or flight is something that always warrants some addressing. Having said that, for those of you who are patients, if this speaks to you and you've wondered, for me personally, fibromyalgia is the number one conventional diagnosis I will equate with Lyme disease. I will bet a pretty penny that if any patient has diagnosis of fibromyalgia, or you think you have a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, maybe a practitioner won't dare call it that or diagnose you that formally, but patients who have fibromyalgia, and if you don't know what that is, feel free to look that up. All right, aches and pains, there's criteria, left, right side, up and above and below waistline, etc. Patients with fibromyalgia, or if it just doesn't make sense, it just doesn't add up, all these aches and pains, it just doesn't add up. If you're older with that kind of story, first question is, what happens when you're off a statin for a week? Okay, I hate to say that, but because I'm not total anti-statin, but if you're off a statin for a week and you still have those aches and pains, or you have fibromyalgia, a formalized diagnosis, hands down, I'm gonna bet my pot of chips diseases in your profile. And if you have not had the opportunity to be evaluated for that and you would like to, you can reach us at rootseekhealth.com. Our team and myself, we would be more than privileged and honored to come alongside you in your journey and to move the needle and help you get the most out of life by helping you get better, right? You're not a diagnosis to us. You are a person. It is just the root causes that we're trying to help you with, to support you outside the conventional system, and help you make more definitive change and more meaningful change in your health journey. If you've already worked with practitioners, if you're making progress, fantastic. We honor you, celebrate you, and want you to keep getting better. Hopefully this information has been helpful to you. If you've plateaued and you're stuck and you could use a second opinion and you just happen to be in that space and it's just coincidental timing, by all means, we don't want to fragment care and disrupt your momentum with any practitioners. But if you are in need of another opinion or a new perspective, rootseekhealth.com is how you can find us. And we would look forward to just meeting you and being part of your journey in one way or another. All right, folks, we will talk again at the next episode. Hopefully this has been helpful. Stay safe. Be mindful about environmental exposures with the ticks out there. Don't need to get overly gassed about it and gaslit about it, but be mindful, and we'll talk to you next time.